Straight ahead, got my head in the game with the red light on. I'm just waiting for the change. Keep my head down low.
Hi, Jay Fallon, and thanks for listening. So, obviously, we had a very sad situation a couple of days ago in Victoria where two police officers been shot, killed. Very sad news indeed. Obviously, when I'd first heard about it, and reading, listening to reports, and seeing who was responsible for the shooting, you can't help but remember what happened in Queensland with the Wymbilla siege shooting, and when the two police officers were shot there as well. And it's been put out that the person responsible. I'm not going to name him; it's not worth it. The person responsible, allegedly responsible, is has some beliefs, follows along the lines of sovereign citizen ideology. So I just wanted to go through this article quickly and also talk about my own experiences with sovereign citizen people when I was working in the police. I'll tell you, actually, I'll go through the article first. So this was out on the Sydney Morning Herald. So alleged uh, Porapunka shooter Desi Freeman is a self-proclaimed sovereign citizen. What does he believes? What does he believe? The ambush that killed two Victoria police officers and wounded a third in Victoria's alpine region highlights the deadly reach of the sovereign citizen movement, a fringe ideology. I would say it's not a fringe ideology. I mean, I dealt with sovereign citizens uh, well over a decade ago, and then before that, when I first joined, they were talking about it. We had a lot of information come out regarding sovereign citizen movements, and that where I was working up in the far north Queensland, there was a lot of people up there who had followed this kind of ideology. So I would say it's not fringe, and mainstream media are kidding themselves if they believe it is. Uh, anyway, that refuses to recognise Australia's laws and is increasingly turning violent. Security agencies have long warned that sovereign citizens, dubbed SovCits in an Australian federal police briefing paper made public in 2023, are no longer just harmless eccentrics. Again, I would have said they were never harmless eccentrics. In my dealings with them, anyway, I'll explain more about that later. But so they, harmless eccentrics. Fueled by COVID lockdowns, that's rubbish. It wasn't just fueled by that. Online conspiracy networks and imported American rhetoric. Again, I'll say it's rubbish about the fueled by COVID lockdowns. Maybe in part, but they've been around a lot longer than the whole COVID. I was dealing with them years before COVID was even heard of. Okay, years before that, and yeah, they were an issue long before that. The movement has hardened into a threat now considered a serious risk by police, courts, and intelligence services. Well, now considered. They've been considered a serious threat. Who wrote this flipping article? Serious threat for a long time. The alleged gunman, 56-year-old Desi Freeman, is a self-proclaimed adherent of the movement, members of which believe the laws of Australia do not apply to them. And I tell you, I found it difficult to deal with people who had this kind of ideology because they're just adamant. They don't have to listen. They don't have to listen to you. They don't have to follow the laws of the land. And you're like, as a police officer, you're like, precious moments. And you cannot, I found it hard to communicate with them because they would not listen. Just adamant. They were right, did not listen. So the attack near Porapunka shares chilling similarities with the 2022 attack in siege in Queensland. So such attacks have led security agencies to warn that the sovereign citizen movement is growing in organisation and volatility. Tuesday's violence raises the latest fears this sort of fringe belief system, like I said, I don't think it's fringe, can translate. Anyway, a sovereign citizen is part of a fringe anti government movement whose members believe they are not bound by the law of the state they live in. So they consider laws, from paying taxes and registering a vehicle to obeying police directions, to be illegitimate contracts to which they have not consented and are not bound. The AFP's briefing, released to it's under the Freedom of Information laws, notes that historically the movement was characterized by eccentric types who established micronations or extreme libertarians who refused to pay tax or get a driver's license. So you had people like this Prince Leonard Casely, whose West Australian Hutt River province claimed to have seceded from Australia. If you haven't seen this, uh, it's a weird setup. I've never been over there, but I've read a bit about it. It's pretty wild what he's done. Since then, though, what was once considered a disconnected and mostly harmless fringe has grown into what security agencies view as an organized and potentially violent threat. So, at its core, the ideology is built on its adherents having a strong belief they are morally and legally correct. They are often confident they'll be vindicated once the government is deposed. The AFP briefing document says, according to the AFP, followers use idiosyncratic interpretations of principles, common law principles, human rights laws, and even the Magna Carta to delegitimize government authority and empower their movement. This leads to the belief that individuals can simply opt out of being governed. A common phrase used when confronted by law enforcement is, I don't consent. Yeah, that's true. I heard that so many times from those people, reflecting a belief that state authority is optional. During anti-lockdown protests, some believers chanted, "You serve us," at police. Social media videos. Oh, I won't say all that. So, why are why are they considered dangerous? The attacks in Porapunka and Wyambila are the most extreme examples of violence by adherents of the movement. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about my experiences with people when I was in the police, specifically with the sovereign citizen movement when I was in general duties. So when I was in the police, there was only probably two groups of people that I found dodgy or that I found, to be quite frank, intimidating. Now, I generally don't get scared from other people, and I'm all up for a bit of a confrontation. If you're in a police officer and you're enforcing the law, I'm fine with it. But what I found, maybe not intimidating, is not the best word, but I was always wary of two different groups the most. So the first one I'll tell you about is when I was in doing the surveillance work. So you do covert surveillance. I like surveillance. I like the covert work, the covert side of it. I was always about. I enjoy the intelligence side of it. I could see the necessity for intelligence. How I don't think general duties police officers place enough emphasis on intelligence and on the importance of intelligence. And when I was working in surveillance, you could see how important it was, how necessary it is to gather all the intelligence, read all the intelligence that you can, and have the best and biggest picture of whom you're dealing with. And I found that the most who I was most wary of when I was during surveillance was probably the uh, Islamic extremist. We dealt with a bit of like the terrorist kind of types of people because they have that ideology. They believe that they are right. They're following a kind of a quasi religious ideology. And so they think that they're following something, they've got a cause that they believe in, they're trying to achieve something, and they justify any kind of action. So in my understanding of Islam is that you're not supposed to partake in alcohol or drugs or this kind of thing. However, I found that the ones that I could see and that we dealt with, they didn't mind dealing with drugs and dealing with the kind of thing because they were raising money to support their cause, which they believed in. So anything, they could justify any kind of action to support their cause because it was for the greater good. Everything is for the greater good. And unlike a criminal, if you're following a criminal, you're dealing with criminals. The beauty about dealing with criminals, even people who are dealing with like organized crime and serious crime, serious criminals, they don't want to be caught and they don't necessarily want to confront police. They don't want to be confronted by police. And so they will, they'll put on a facade and talk nicely and maybe just try and answer questions because they're trying to dodge questions, trying to dodge the real answers and this kind of thing because they're all about making money. I used to watch some criminals and you think, mate, you're really an entrepreneur. You're really someone who's out there and a businessman. But for some reason, you've decided to turn your mind towards making money from drugs and all this kind of thing. And seriously, the long hours that some people put into their criminal activity, you sit there going, dude, why don't you go and just do a legitimate business? You know, and you obviously got quite a good mind. And I always wondered, it's like they're taking the easy way out, but they've got they're very business minded. And those kinds of criminals, I always found they were probably a bit more fun when it came to following around when with surveillance because because they were just about the business. They're just about making the money. And so it was a bit more, I found anyway, it was a bit more loose when you were doing surveillance on these kinds of people. And, they were out and about and they'd do a few more interesting things. Whereas extremists, the kind of CT Islamic extremist kind of types, they were very serious. And there was always the threat of if they were confronted by police and they thought that police were following, they were confrontational. And they were about, because they had a different mindset. They're not about just making money. They're about succeeding in their ideology. They had a bigger picture, and they were trying to raise money, or they were trying to achieve things for a bigger picture, for the greater, what they view as the greater good and their ideology. So I found that you had to be a lot more wary of those types of people. And there were other things that came about during that work, which you think, wow, you really need to be aware and you need to have a good understanding of the people you're dealing with, and you understand just how important intelligence is. Now, when it came to, I only dealt with sovereign citizen people when I was in general duties in GDs there, but there was a lot of them up in the far north when I was working, and when I was doing, I did a few stints up in Wudjil area. And so Wujul's mainly it's an indigenous community, but then all on the outskirts, outside of the township, there's a lot of sovereign citizens, and they were hairy. Just things got hairy at times. You sit there going, so all that kind of area, Cape Tribulation, all the way up to Cooktown and beyond. I didn't work in Cooktown itself, or worked just outside in other communities. But you deal with the violence and stuff that would go on within communities, alcohol fueled violence and that, but you always knew what you were getting. And then people were always a bit wary of police and they didn't want to confront too much with police. And, you have your alcohol violence and all this kind of thing, drugs and this kind of thing. But you deal with sovereign citizens, mate, painful. And again, they've got their ideology, they've got their belief system. They look at it as if they are believing in the greater good. They are fighting for the greater good. They're arguing with you for the greater good. There's no way they're not getting a license, and they will argue black and blue why they don't need to get a license. They exactly like what that article said. They commonly break out in these interpretations of common law. They're quoting common law principles to you, quoting human rights laws, which I some of it I get and I understand. I can see how they've gotten there, but human rights laws, that they will go for all these different human rights laws, which I do have a problem with the way our government just overlooks human rights laws when it's not convenient for them. But then they'll always go back to the Magna Carta and all this, like the articles that delegitimize government authority and empower their movement. So, look, what I found the most concerning when I dealt with the sovereign citizen movement people was that they were so confrontational. Like I said, criminals avoid confrontation. They're all about making money. They're all about doing their other things, doing their dodgy little operations because they're trying to make money. They're trying to do other things. So they don't want to talk to police. They don't want to deal with police. They'll put on a facade. They'll pretend to be nice, even though they might be dangerous. They'll still pretend to be nice because they're trying to get away. They're trying to do other things. when you come to dealing with the Islamic kind of terrorist kind of person, again, they tended to be, if they were confronted, they were going to push back. They could be very confrontational, and I found this with the sovereign citizen movement people. They were very confrontational. They had a belief. They thought they were working for the greater good. There was no way you were right as a police officer. You did not have any justification. Your grounding, your standing in the law did not matter. You were a part of a bigger system that they did not recognize, they did not want to recognize, and they would argue black and blue. And it wouldn't be just like, you'd pull up, there'd be a couple in the car, and the male would talk. And, a lot of the time, if you're talking to criminals and that, the other person wouldn't really say a lot, or they'd be kind of a bit more demure. However, I'd always find male and female, mate, she was always just as confrontational as he was. And she would always, want to get out of the car, want to argue, want to give you paraphernalia, want to lecture you on the law and how you're not right, and how the Magna Carta always came back to the Magna Carta every time I think. But you could see that these people were, in my mind, were dangerous. They were so confrontational. They believed they had their ideology, and there is no way you, as an officer of the law, as a police officer, and they love to talk about the minutiae of language. Oh well, you're a police officer. What does an officer mean? What does an officer of the law mean? And they'd be going back into all this language, old school language, and you sit there going, dude, do you really have to? Anyway, I was very wary of them. We had a few jobs up in, especially around that Cape Tribulation area, where you knew you'd have to go and do kind of like what happened in Williambilla. You'd have to go into these areas, and you knew that these people have followed this kind of ideology. And this is where I think general duties police, just from what I've read from what happened in Williambilla and also what happened in Victoria here, I don't think uniformed police have been taking sovereign citizen people seriously enough. The times that I had to deal with them, I realized, and it's probably just more my personality, my attitude with policing. I would generally sit back and monitor and watch people and try and assess, get a good reading on the baseline of the situation, and assess how they're moving, what they're doing, what the attitude was, and I would go off that. So my observations with of general duties police, both when I was in there and just other observations I've seen, is that a lot of police, uniform police, especially ones who haven't worked in other areas, they will tend to, when they're confronted with a situation or certain personality types, they will tend to exacerbate the situation. They'll push back. They'll worsen the situation and cause it to intensify because they've got the uniform on. They haven't maybe had enough experience. They just keep pushing back. Well, I'm the police officer. I need to go in. A lot of the time, in my opinion, is general duties police need to pull back and gather more information, gather more intel. Intel, especially when dealing with the sovereign citizen movement, intelligence is of the utmost importance. We saw in the Wyambella, from what I've read in the Wyambella situation, siege, it was the intelligence or lack of sharing intelligence that really let those police down. First off, it was the lack of intelligence. Secondly, sending very inexperienced police officers into a situation like that. I think that was a failing of police. I think it was a failing of the hierarchy. Rather than those two officers failing, the leadership around them really failed them. And because intelligence was there, but it wasn't passed on in a timely manner, and people get very blasé when they're back in uniform. People get very blasé about the way they handle things. Oh, it's just another job. It's just another this. But if police are going to be dealing more with with the sovereign citizen movement, you need to gather intelligence. You need to know exactly who you're dealing with and take intelligence seriously and don't be blasé. This is what you're going to have to deal with. So, this is what you're going to have to do. I don't believe that a lot of general duties or uniform police place enough emphasis on intel, and then and the hierarchy need to be held more accountable for passing it on in a timely fashion, in a timely manner, and disseminating it properly amongst the troops. So, look, some of the things in that report, yeah, I agree with, but I don't think it's as fringe as what they believe, unfortunately. And also, I think they need to look at how people get to this time frame. I've dealt with a lot of people who have this who believe follow this ideology, and I kind of get the way I understand why they've gotten there. The issue is we have governments who constantly let people down and mistreat people. We have a lot of corruption in government, and people look at it and go, "Well, why should I follow a corrupt government?" And that they end up moving into this ideology. They talk about, oh, it was, it's really come alive. It's really exacerbated since the pandemic happened. But you look at what happened with the pandemic, the government just completely railroaded people with the human rights laws. And the issue was that I saw is the government always spouted off how, we believe in human rights and we follow human rights and the Human Rights Act and these laws and we uphold them, we support them. And then the first opportunity they had to turn their backs on human rights, or the first opportunity they had where they could show that they really do believe in human rights and support the Human Rights Act, they turned their back on it and said, "Oh, well, actually, no. Things are a bit hard now, so we're not going to support everyone's rights for everyone's human rights." And so then you have people who say, "Well, if the government's not going to support me, even though they say it's all window dressing, well, then I'm not going to support the government. I'm not going to, I'm going to place myself outside the law," which doesn't work either. You have to work in the law. I do believe in a government. I just don't think we have very good government, and I think we've got a lot of corruption, far too much corruption in our government. We have very self-serving people working in our governments, and way too much bureaucracy. But I believe in government. I think government is a good thing. I believe government of Western society has really helped us. I believe it's biblical, and secondly, I believe it's helped us get really, it's led us to where we are now, living in a really good society. I just believe that we have far too much corruption, and some of the people in there are in there for selfish desires, selfish motivations, and they're not really there to serve the people. I just believe government is there to serve people, serve the citizens, and help make the community as a whole a better place to live, and a better place for our children to enjoy. So, I don't believe sovereign citizen movement is a good thing, but I do understand how people get to that place where they think, well, they'll want to follow that ideology. And I do believe that police, especially general duties police, because my experience anyway, you don't tend to take intel as seriously as what you should or as what you could do. I think you need to take it a lot more seriously, place a lot more emphasis on it, and really get a bigger picture of who you're dealing with before you go and deal with some of these people. That's just all my opinion. It's very sad, very obviously very sad what's happened in Victoria. It's disgusting how these people can justify this kind of behavior. These police, as I have my issues with police and with the hierarchy and with the leadership and the way they're taking our police, but I believe police are very necessary for our society. I just have a big problem with the way the leadership are doing things, and in my mind, it's not very good leadership at all. I believe that a lot of the problems that our police institutions have had across our nation is because of the poor leadership or the lacking of leadership that we've had in the hierarchy. Anyway, that's my opinion on everything. If you're in general duties, my advice is get a hold of as much intel as you possibly can before you go and deal with people well, actually, before you go and deal with any kind of situation. If you're sent out to go and deal with someone, go and do a check on someone or whatever, weapons check, anything like that. Get as much intel as you can before dealing with people. Know exactly who you're dealing with. And always remember, if someone starts being very confrontational, it doesn't hurt just to take a step back sometimes and reassess the situation, because you can always come back. You can always come back, gather more intel, gather more information, gather more friends, come back in greater force. You don't have to deal with things right then and there. If someone's confrontational, maybe just chill, lower the temperature, and say, oh, it's all right, we'll come back later. Don't tell them that you'll come back later. Anyway, that's all just my opinion. Please be careful out there. My name's Jay Fallon, and thanks for listening.
They just fuel a desire that will take me higher. I'm on fire because nothing's gonna bring me down. Nothing's gonna bring me down. Nothing's gonna stop me now. No more deals to be done. No nothing's gonna just focus on the goal. Nothing's gonna stop me now. Nothing's gonna hold me down. Got my eye on the prize. Gonna say